We're looking today at Exodus chapter 28 all the way through the end of chapter 31. A big section here that had a lot of pertinence for the people of Israel and their worship, how the Lord set it up, especially with the priests and the tabernacle and so forth. Not a lot of direct pertinence for us today, and so this is why people get bored here or get lost or don't care, and maybe sometimes quit reading Scripture. So the two extremes is don't try to spiritualize every piece of garment or whatever that Aaron was wearing. At the same time, notice at least briefly that there's a significance to these things, and God sets up a form of worship among His people that is very important to them at that time. And we get the big overarching picture of the holiness of God, the importance and the just the seriousness of worship of Him, so different from the pagan gods and pagan religions that surrounded them, and it would become the means, the ritual of and tradition of the people of Israel up through the time of Christ, and so the beginning of the church age. So let's take a look here at a lot of these things that are down here for us in chapter 28. We see just a lot of detail. Again, I'm going to run through this quickly. They've got the garments of Aaron and his family, his sons. We showed you a picture of the high priest yesterday. Very detailed stuff. And he talks about the breastplate that he wore, stones that were on the breastplate, and so forth. Probably the most interesting is found in verse 30 of chapter 28, the Urim and the Thummim, which had something to do. These are mysterious things. Somehow the Lord was able, on occasion, to communicate something to the people of Israel through these particular rocks or whatever they were on the breastplate of the high priest. Very interesting. We don't know much about that, but we do know that occasionally this is actually something that took place with these two items. And then he moves on, all sorts of details in the clothing. When we get to chapter 29, we see the consecration of the priest and the ritual that went with that, the different bulls and rams that were to be sacrificed as Aaron and his sons were ordained or dedicated to be priests for the Lord. And it says in verse 9 of chapter 28 that Aaron and his sons would be the high priest perpetually before the people of Israel. Now, that didn't always happen, especially later on. We don't find the high priest during the time of Jesus had anything at all to do necessarily with Aaron's family, but this was to be the ruling at the time, and it was to be obeyed. It talks about the sacrifices, a lot of details. Leviticus embellishes this a lot more, as we'll see later. But there's sin offerings in verse 14. There's a burnt offering in verse 18 that brings a smoothing aroma before the Lord. There are in verse 24 wave offerings, in verse 28 heave offerings. Just a lot of offerings with a lot of detail, like again Leviticus will give us more about later. In verse 32, we find that even down to the details of what the priests were to eat, coming from the various sacrifices, is given in detail. There is very minute, very laid out, very ritualistic, and these details are there for us. And it says here in verse 46 of chapter 29, they shall know that I am the Lord their God who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. All this pointed to the fact that there was only one God, the true God, Yahweh, and these people are reminded through these rituals of that truth. Then we find in chapter 30, he starts talking about the altar of incense. So I left these articles out here today. For us, there's the altar of incense, and exactly what was to be burnt on this altar of incense, and when to burn it, and so forth. Later on in verses 22 on down, there's oil that's involved in all this as well, and the makeup of that oil is involved. And then it speaks here of the craftsmen in chapter 31, who God gives special wisdom to understand how to build these things, and even the clothing that Aaron was to have. Then we come to verse 12 of chapter 31. We have the sign of the Sabbath. Now, this is very important because it says here that in verse 13, you shall observe my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctified you. If we drop down to verse 16, it says, So the sons of Israel shall observe the Sabbath to celebrate the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. Very important to note that one of the 10 Commandments is the keeping of the Sabbath, but it is a sign to the people of Israel that the Lord is their God. It's His covenant. The Mosaic covenant is the sign of that is the Sabbath. So the Jews were to keep the Sabbath as a reminder of as a sign of the covenant between the Lord and themselves. And so that's the reason they were to keep the Sabbath. And so we now move on. We're finally through this furniture and the building of the tabernacle and the priest's garments and all those things. And now we're getting back to the narrative. And it's not a very happy narrative, as you probably know, as we come to chapter 32. See you tomorrow.